Welcome to Mallett and Michelle on Dripping Springs, hosted by me, Steve Mallett, and Michelle Lewis.
What?
Only because you say I say things
It's like,
backwards
what was
all the
that
time.
movie where the two people like ran into each other and traded personalities?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So should I just make up some words now?
Well, that's
I'm having
what
a splendorifish day.
Hey, you got to say it with confidence. That didn't sound
There was
very
no
confident.
confidence in
No,
that?
no. But speaking of confident, today we are going to have Steve Friedman on. He is author of The Essential Guide for Families with Down Syndrome. And here's something I know nothing about, Beyond Introversion. He is
No, you don't. You don't know anything about that.
And he's also
That's probably a lesson for me.
Probably. Maybe we're going to get some pointers on that. And he's also a speaker on nationally on the subject of Down syndrome. So he travels all around and speaks on that. Apparently, we have a community here in Dripping Springs that is supported by this. And I'm really excited to hear what he has to say.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm excited too. And I've got a really good friend that has a wonderful son, Matt, that has Down syndrome, a great kid. So I'm sure that Steve's going to have some good information for us on that. Have you heard of this new thing they're doing? They're rolling it out in Austin called FREEWATER.
No?
Yeah, this company, it's a brainchild of this guy, Josh Clifford's. He was running a nonprofit overseas called the Save the Refugees. And they were doing some research on how they could best support these refugees. And he said that more than half of the refugees that they interviewed said that they fled their country so they could have access to clean food and water.
Oh.
So it's a big part
global problem.
Yeah, it's a global problem, and it's a big reason why people flee the countries where they live. So he's come up with this idea where he can support charities that support clean water around the world. And instead of just like selling bottled water and, like the Little League does sometimes, he's got this process where he has cartons and bottles and they put advertising on them. So, Mallett Integrity Team buys 1,000 bottles of water and he puts our logo on them, and then they give the water away for free. And then part of the proceeds from the advertising fee that we pay goes to charity. Yeah.
That is a very interesting business concept.
That's thinking out of the box, right? Yeah. So,
very servant heart minded.
It is. Yeah. He says that one of the benefits for an advertiser is if you have a bottle or a carton, you're going to typically hold that for about 45 minutes. You're going to carry it around. It's going to be in your car before you dispose of it or put it in the recycling bin. Whereas, a billboard is, you might see it for 2 seconds on the freeway, or a commercial on TV, which there's not a lot of that anymore. But even like a commercial on YouTube, it's people watch them for 5 seconds and then they hit skip ad, So they're basically, they donate 10 cents of every bottle that they make to water-oriented charities. So that's pretty cool. And they've already donated $25,000 to projects in Kenya and India.
Is he based out of here in Austin?
They're in Austin, yeah. So he's working on this project where he'll have water vending machines around Austin that will dispense free water. And I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but you could actually put your logo on the bottles that are coming out of the machine. So it would do some process where it'd print on the bottles, like you'd stand in front of the machine and
15 minutes, all the water's gone.
How long
all the water's gone.
Yeah. But
we need to go check it out when he creates it. Let's go check it out.
He's saying that for each machine, he can donate up to $9,000 a year to charity.
Oh.
So if it works, but right now they're testing them. And he said that basically what we're trying to do is we're getting select people to go in and try and break the machines, because that's what happens when you put them out on a street or in some airport or something somewhere. People are going to be rough on them, so they're trying to get them to be bulletproof.
That's only if my M&Ms get stuck in the vending machine. That's where I'm going to start.
I saw a guy in Heathrow Airport taking out his aggression on a machine because he put his whatever pound in there and he couldn't get his Cheetos out.
That's the only thing I'm doing. I'm shaking that, or actually kind of putting my hand up there and crawling and
getting
kind of
stuck.
Getting stuck, and then
so that's a good look.
So the U.S. Postal Service, they track change of address forms, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a study from January 2023 to now that they did of how many people are
So the
moving.
last 6 to 7 months.
6 to 7 months. How many people are moving out and where?
Okay.
So there's the top 7, give or take.
Okay.
Dallas is number 7. They lost around
That
5
people are leaving.
leaving. It's not even talking about the people how many people are moving in. This is just the people that are leaving. So they're not talking about the people that are moving in or where they're moving to. They're just tracking the change of address. So Dallas is number 7. 5,000 and some change did change of addresses. Miami, number 6, again, 5,000 and some change. Austin, number 5. The biggest housing market decline is in the city of Austin right now. 7,175 residents lost change of addresses,
So this isn't a net number. This is how many. This is a
just change of addresses
just
out of the
tallying
area.
How many people are filling out change of address cards from a certain area? It's
Yes.
not. So we might have had 20,000 people move in, but this is counting the number of people
Or
that
move into Dripping Springs.
Right,
Because we see that being in real estate. We're seeing a lot of people, probably actually a lot more people from Austin moving into Dripping right now than California moving
that's the
into
highest
Dripping.
percentage is people moving out here to live in a smaller town, better schools, that kind of thing.
Well, right, because don't you sometimes when we come across a listing appointment and sometimes they're always thinking there's this magical, mythical California buyer with all cash
It's so funny.
on their unicorn riding in.
I don't think we've ever talked about that on the show. I can't tell you how many times over the years somebody at a listing appointment, I'll say, your property's worth $1 million. Well, we were thinking $1.3 million because, there's some guy from California that's got more money than he knows what to do with. And he's going to come here and fall in love with our property and he's going to be willing to do whatever it takes to buy it. And 100%. That never, ever, ever has happened.
And
it has not happened. And it won't happen.
They have brain cells left
true.
because they've moved out of California.
That's right.
So.
And if you have $1.1 million or $1.3 million, you're smart enough to know not to overpay for a property.
Exactly. Well, okay. So number 4, New York City. Number 3, we just spoke about them. LA, of course, that's no surprise. About 7,600 and some change.
That's
left.
actually low compared. I would think
just
people
change
are
of addresses.
leaving LA in droves.
Chicago, number 2, no surprise with the crime rate there that's going on. 7,800. But number one of the people that have the change of addresses, Houston, Texas.
You know what? I just read an article this weekend about. I'm not going to get into the global warming thing, but that. The heat is chasing people out of Houston.
Well, that could be a godsend.
Yeah, but that and you and I have talked about it. I think it's cyclical, but the trend of these summers being so hot is making, and Houston is nothing but concrete. So when it's 100 degrees here, it's probably 112.
Well, it's swampy there too.
Yeah, so it's very unpleasant. And this article was saying that if this trend continues, and who knows if it will, that we could see an exodus of people from the southern states to the northern states, which not only means people, it means capital.
Oh, well,
meaning if you live in Houston and you own a house in Houston and 500,000 people leave Houston because it's too damn hot, then your value of your house will go down.
Well, only 8,639 people have left
bad.
Houston.
I wonder
so
how
far.
many were added, because I'll bet you they added 50,000 people that moved from
and it
out of the area.
Again, it didn't say how many people, or it didn't track the suburbs. They're probably moving out of Houston into Sugar Land or the Woodlands or Katy or something like that. They're just wanting to get out of the big city proper, just like a lot of the Austinites are.
Do you think if you ever sold your house, you would stay in Dripping, or would you leave the state?
No, if I'm selling my house, I would never leave the state. I'm in Texas. I'm not leaving the state. Yeah. I will probably move where my children end up, wherever Tate goes to medical school or what, Kendall's already up in the Dallas area. So we will probably be centrally located wherever our kids are. They can't get rid of us.
Yeah. Holly and I have just been kicking around ideas about where we'd retire if we go. And we may live here till the day we die. I really like it. So I don't know where else we'd live, but we've been looking at Idaho and Pennsylvania and other places. And, it's a trade-off, right? It's like, okay, yeah, it's only 85 in the summer. Ooh, that sounds good. But it's -9 in February, you know? So
good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. But
no.
Yeah,
no.
I'm with you. Well, but I mean, I also read an article this morning that
you read a lot of articles.
I do. I read a lot. I know it's funny because I say all the time, I don't read as much as I used to. And I always mean books. I don't read as many books as I used to, but I probably read 10 to 20 articles a day. Every single day.
I read a lot of articles too, the comments in TikTok.
Yeah. I read a couple of those this weekend and I shook my head and I'm like, oh, what is wrong with this country? Some of the stuff that people say. You know how we've been talking about AI and Chat GPT maybe putting some people out of business?
Well, that whole strike that's going on in Hollywood is about the writer's strike and about how they want to be protected and rewrites and AI is doing this or their image being protected.
Yeah, well, I know. And I think there have been some people that have said, write me a script for a 30-minute sitcom about, blah, 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 blah. And Chat GPT will crank something out. And with some massaging and some rewriting here and there, you have a pretty good TV show. So they should be a little concerned.
Yeah.
Well, I was just reading an article. One of the places that jobs will be taken is at the drive-through at fast food restaurants.
Well, you can't understand them half the time anyway.
Well, that's one of the reasons they're doing it. There's this company, it's called Presto. And right now they came up with AI software that can control the voices and the responses when you order food at a drive-up.
McDonald's already kind of has it. When you pull up.
No, that's different because all that is a recorded message when somebody comes up that says, may I take your order?
No, it says, are you going to be using the app today? And I guess if you say no, then a real person comes on.
A real person comes. But if you use the app, then is there a standard response?
I don't know. I just go there like on a weekly basis just to see if their ice cream
and it never works. Yeah. Well, this company Presto now is being used in 350 locations around the country, and it is AI ordering at a drive-up window. So when you pull up, it says, "Hi, may I take your order?" And then this AI responds to you, and it's actually pretty accurate for the most part. And this woman, Joanna Stern, it's a Wall Street Journal article, she tested it a couple different ways. She had her phone and she had a barking dog playing. So she would pull up to the window and she'd hit play on the barking dog and it was super loud. And she'd say her order. And this AI got it right every single time.
Then why can't CVS, when I try to call the pharmacy, why can't they understand that I'm saying the other day I literally lost my ever-loving mind.
Maybe they need AI.
I'm operator, pharmacy, pharmacy. And they're like, don't.
Trying to get anybody on the phone anymore is ridiculous.
It was insane. I think I called back 3 times.
Yeah.
3 times. But.
Well, this Joanna Stern, she made 30 orders at Arby's. The only one that she did that had a little bit of an issue was every time she would talk, she would hit her horn. So she would say, "I need a cheeseburger." And the AI was having a little bit of a hard time, but it actually got her order right.
Oh.
And then where it really falls down and they have to get a person involved is when you start asking things like, is the bun on that gluten-free, or how many calories are in that doubled mac cheeseburger, whatever thing that you're ordering, fried.
My favorite thing to ask at this Chick-fil-A, Belterra. Now, this is the only Chick-fil-A that I know that does this, but it kind of ticks me off. I'll say, I want my fries double fried. Sorry, ma'am, we only get them one temperature here. And I do it every single time just to see if they've ever changed their policy.
Really?
Because Chick-fil-A French fries, double fried, are the bomb diggity.
I've never had that.
They are so, okay, well, I'll take you to the Brody or the original Ken Massey's one.
And they
They will double fry it.
Yeah. The one thing she did not like about this AI taking your order was they constantly upsell you. Would you like to make that a large? Would you like a peach pie with that or whatever? She did this at an Arby's. And so she didn't like that. And she said that a lot of times you'll say yes. So that upsell actually works. This AI generated.
That's how I do it with you. I'm like, Steve, would you?
Yeah, right.
Just constantly upselling you.
Yeah, you are. You're really good at that. So there's 3.3 million workers that work drive-thrus right now. So there's a chance those 3.3 million workers are put out of business.
Well, no, because they'll just be put in the dining room because nobody else works in the dining room.
So that's actually this company Presto, and one of the managers of these restaurants said, we're not going to have less personnel.
Yeah.
We're just going to take the personnel and put them doing other duties, which may be true, but I'd be a little worried about that.
How about cleaning the dining room really good? That would be.
Yeah. Have you ever, there's very few, well, Chick-fil-A is usually pretty good.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
But you go in there at lunch hour, they can't keep up.
No.
But, and I think part of that goes back to, we've got these government mandated, basically, price controls with the wages, and they're driving the wages up, and it's really hard for somebody selling $1 hamburgers to pay somebody $15 like in California.
What do you mean by that? The government mandated?
Well, the minimum wage is like I think in California now I think it's $15 an hour. We'll need to verify that, but it's artificially high.
I heard. Well, I think nationally the minimum wage is $7.25.
Yeah, but in certain states it's much higher.
Yeah.
And so if you're a burger joint and you're selling $3 hamburgers and a dollar French fries added on, it's really hard to pay somebody $15 an hour to take those orders.
It's kind of what
those are the jobs that are going to go first.
Kind of what we were talking about with Mark when he was on our podcast last week about
that's right.
Getting workers.
I mean, if you're a business owner, you're looking for efficiencies, it's a great way to do it. I do like talking to a person though, don't you? Like, hey, you having a good day?
I do.
You can't do that with AI. They don't care.
My AI would just spontaneously implode on itself. You're like, okay, we're done with you.
There was Joanna, she asked the AI something. She said, she made her order. I'll take a double cheeseburger and a large Coke. And the AI said, yeah, that's great. And she said, and by the way, are you free tonight? And the AI said, sure. So I don't know.
It's like messing with Alexa, which I don't have in my house anyways.
True.
Okay,
it's
so
true.
I did not read an article. I actually did. I stole this
TikTok.
from KView. No,
KView.
I from KView. Speaking of technology, the Williamson County Economic Development Partnership Board opens a global office in South Korea.
Oh, you mentioned this last week. Tell me more.
It opened July 1st in Seoul. It's going to help South Korean companies that are looking to expand their business in the United States. And Dave Porter, who is the director of this economic development for Williamson County, said he believes that South Korea could represent a, quote, new frontier for Texas business owners.
Wow.
South Korea generates technology like Samsung. Samsung, relocated over here.
Huge plant.
Huge.
It's in Taylor.
It's in Taylor.
Yeah.
Let's see. Now I guess that's in Williamson
like
County.
$5 billion plant plus all the other businesses that came, the ancillary businesses that support that plant.
I made semiconductor, and my husband being in the semiconductor, I mean, Samsung doesn't have the best reputation of quality workplace environment.
But they have $5 billion. In September,
Wilco, Williamson County, will also host a seminar in Seoul, South Korea, to 100 different South Korean companies, and the subject is going to be how to do business in Williamson County.
Really?
They said that it's going to help foreign computer chip companies navigate relocating to Central Texas. I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know how I feel about inviting foreign or Asian.
Anyway.
I know, but
they're coming anyway, though. So if they're coming and they're going to move to Bexar County, why wouldn't Williamson County try and get them here?
I mean, so to do
I think it's actually pretty smart.
To do the reverse, in April, South Korea opened up their first office in Austin, and it's called, it's Korea's state-funded trade organization. So how you feel about that?
So that company is trying to get Texas companies to invest in South Korea.
Yes.
Or do business in South Korea.
Uh-huh. I don't know. I don't know much about it, but
yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that. I don't know why I'd have a problem with that. I mean, I do have a problem with some of the foreign governments coming here and buying up a lot of our businesses and a lot of our land. I don't think.
Well, don't you think this one leads to another? I mean, like I said, I don't know enough about it, but I would love to have a conversation with somebody who maybe knows more about it.
Yeah,
And
if you know somebody that's connected to that, mallettmichelle@gmail.com or message us on Instagram. So
that's right.
Hey, let's take a little break and get Steve Friedman in here and find out what he's got going on.
This portion of the show is brought to you by the Mallett Integrity Team of real estate professionals. They are based in Dripping Springs and bring you over 45 years of combined experience helping people reach their hill country real estate dreams. When you want the best in town, call them at 512-829-2062 or look them up at mallettintegrityteam.com. And now, here's Steve and Michelle.
Welcome back with Steve Friedman, author of Essential Guide for Families with Down Syndrome and Beyond Introversion. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
How did you end up in Dripping Springs?
Well, this was probably not the first place I ever thought I would be. I grew up in Alabama. Right after school, I got a job with Shell Oil that moved me to Houston. Again, never expected to be in Texas. And lo and behold, 30 years later, and I retired from Shell, still in Houston, had a couple of side trips, but in Houston, raised the family. It was all great. Suddenly the kids are getting older and moving out. And our youngest was graduating high school. So we became empty nest. We were almost empty nesters. Our oldest daughter, whose name is Gwendolyn, is now 28. And she has Down syndrome. So she's been very active. We've all been very active in the Down syndrome community in Houston. And she had finished high school and gone to a post-high school program, which was great, but getting a little bit routine for her. And she's quite a go-getter and
that's
really very energetic about her own independence. So we had been looking primarily before COVID, we were looking a lot at what's the next step for her independence plan. And we were working on different skills and things like that. And she always wanted to move out of the house. You know, she saw her sister and brother move out, and that was on her list. And so we started to look around right before COVID at a lot of places in Houston and even up to Dallas, because we no longer really were pinned down to Houston. And then we came to Austin and found Marbridge, which is a fantastic residential living community for a wide variety of people with special needs. And so we loved it. And I think it was like 2 weeks later and COVID hit. So we put all that on pause. We all hunkered down in Houston. And about a year later, we dusted that off and said, you know, I think it's time for us to kind of rekindle that. So we met with the folks in Marbridge. We came out here, just loved it again, got on the waiting list. About 6 months later, in the summer of 21, she got off the waiting list. Okay. So we knew we were coming here. So we sold our house in Houston and followed her out here. And by the fall of 21, we were in Austin.
Smack dab in the middle of COVID.
Right after COVID, but you know, still kind of strange. It was, if you recall, in 21, the summer especially, the market was really hyped because people were starting to get out and move around.
Oh, yeah. We remember.
Oh, yeah.
So
we remember.
We lived it.
Yeah. You guys probably, maybe you enjoyed that. I know as a buyer, I didn't really enjoy that.
Yeah. No. Sellers and realtors were loving it.
Yeah. So, and as far as Dripping Springs, I mean, Austin was one thing. Dripping Springs was another. We lived relatively close to Houston when we were there and enjoyed being near the city. I worked in the city. We had a lot of stuff to do with the kids, you know, museums and zoos and things like that. When we came out here, we pretty quickly, especially given the market, realized we're not going to be in the city. And we wanted to be relatively close to where Gwendolyn is at Marbridge. And we came out to look at Belterra with our realtor, and we just really fell in love with it. Being out sort of in the country is not anything we've ever experienced before, but we love the neighborhood. We love the activity. We love the close proximity to where she was. And since then, it's been almost 2 years, and we've just fallen in love with the whole area. People are so great. It's kind of still got that small town feel that we're kind of holding on to.
Yeah.
And yet we can run into the city if we need to.
And you can walk to HEB now.
Yes. It's now like a mile away from the house.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
That would be you asked me a question, I think it was last time, like if I were to sell my house, would I leave Dripping Springs or would I leave Texas? My only thing is that I cannot go anywhere where there's not an HEB.
Oh, well.
Period.
It's just Texas, right?
It's just well, Mexico too.
Oh, well,
they have a
you
couple,
could go to Mexico.
I could go to Mexico.
So Gwendolyn comes here and moves into Marbridge. Is that the first time she had been not living with you, or had she been semi-independent before that?
Other than some summer camps for a week or 2 weeks, this was the big move.
Yeah.
So
how did that go? What was that transition like?
probably a lot easier for her than
I
it
bet.
was for us.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Bet.
I mean, and given it was still COVID, there were a lot of restrictions on. We could go into her new room and settle her in while nobody else was in the building, but we had a very limited period of time. And then one of the protocols that Marbridge has, regardless of COVID, is for the first 6 weeks, you're not really supposed to see her. You can call her, FaceTime, all that sort of stuff, but they really want her to
acclimate
and develop her own support system. So we talked to her every day, but we were very separate. But I remember when we dropped her off in her room, and my wife Jennifer and I are walking out to the car, and we got in the car and we just sat there and we're like, what have we done?
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I think every parent feels that way.
Yeah.
I remember when we dropped my son off in New Orleans, that was his first station. He's in the military. And I remember driving by the dome and going, I cannot believe I'm leaving my child in this city. I cannot believe I'm doing that.
Every parent has that moment, don't they? I've had those with my kids too, where it's like that's the step into adulthood. They're going to be independent and they're making their own decisions right here, even though she has a little bit of oversight, I guess, there at Marbridge.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
They're fairly independent.
Yeah, what does that look like? Does she have her own like kitchen and things like that, or what does it look like?
So a few things that really attracted us to Marbridge was they were just very open. So here we are in COVID, and a lot of other places that we looked at were very closed down. Like they wouldn't even share what was going on. And we thought, one of the things we really want is communication and transparency.
Yeah.
Everything's not always going to be perfect regardless of where you are. But if they're going to basically be our daughter's caregivers 24/7, then I want to make sure we're hearing a lot. So they were great at communication. They have 3 levels of care. So they have what I would call semi-independent. So they live in either a dorm or a lodge. And in that lodge, so Gwendolyn's in a lodge. And so in the lodge, she has a suite mate. So they have separate rooms, share a bathroom, and there's 12 other girls in the lodge. And so they have 24/7 care if they need it. Most of it is just reminders and kind of helping with medicines and things like that. And on campus, they have classes throughout the day. They have social activity. They work on campus. So a lot of different things for really all the residents. But in the semi-independent, they get a little bit of a helping hand.
Okay.
Then they have a more independent. So they live in lodges. They have a kitchen. Some of them drive and work off campus. So it's a higher level of capability and development at that stage. And then the third one is assisted living, what we would kind of all be somewhat familiar with. And so it's interesting and one of the things we really liked, because we felt that over the years, because we believe this can be a long-term sustainable option, she could move up to the independent. She may one day have to move down to the assisted living, but it gives her a wide variety of activity and flexibility for her future, as opposed to, well, this is good for 5 years, and then what do we do?
Right. Yeah. And if she has to make that transition, she doesn't have to just upend her whole life and move to some new place with new people. And she'd have that continuity there.
Yeah,
does she have a good little circle of friends, and does she have a boyfriend?
She does not have a boyfriend, but she does have a circle of friends. So, it's like most situations with young girls and guys to some extent, but there's friends and then there's drama.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was waiting for the drama word, the D word. Yeah.
And so that's what we talk about. That weighs heavily on her sometimes.
Yes.
Somebody nudges her or accidentally bumps her, and that can be offensive.
Right.
So it's interesting because she was a new person 2 years ago coming into this group that for the most part was pretty stable. So she's met a lot of friends and she is very proud of her work and her classes it's like going to summer camp in many ways. And she's very proud of being independent. So it's all good. They don't really encourage boyfriends and girlfriends because it gets kind of messy.
Yeah.
Sure.
She's historically had boyfriends at her previous school. She hasn't really indicated that she's missed that a lot, but I think that is one aspect of her life that is important to her. And so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. So you were in the oil business 30 years and then you raised Gwendolyn. And then what prompted you to start this journey of, public speaker now? And you've written, I guess, 2 books?
3 books.
3 books. So
3 books.
What prompted that?
Well, when I was a kid, teenager, I used to write. And I just enjoyed writing. I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I'm a classic introvert. And so for me, I enjoyed.
Same. I am too.
Oh, shut up.
I'm not sure I believe you, but that's okay.
Don't believe it.
But so I really enjoyed writing and reading. And so when I was in high school, I was on the school newspaper and I went to journalism camp and I thought maybe I'll major in journalism. So my father, who was in business, probably smartly said, I don't think that's a good path. That might be where your passion is, but you probably want to earn money. And so he was probably right. And as I've grown up, I've realized that probably was the correct thing. So I went down the business path and into Shell for 3 decades. And when I got close to retiring, I thought, well, what am I going to do? I'm not a golfer or a fisherman. And so I thought, well, I definitely want to keep busy. And I really don't want to have to go back to work in the traditional sense. If so, I would have just stayed there. And so I thought, well, I really enjoyed writing when I was a kid. So let me just dabble in that and see if I enjoy it.
What was your first knack at it? What book was your first one?
So my first book was called In Search of Courage, an Introvert Story. So like many new authors, it was a memoir.
It's totally like opposite of what an introvert would do, though, is like put yourself on blast and tell your story.
Well, I found that's a good point. I found that there's kind of 2 angles to that. One is the writing itself. Introverts, oftentimes journal and generally like to kind of sort through what's in our minds and getting it on paper is fine and all that sort of stuff. The marketing of it and sharing of that story, that's a completely different
You needed
matter.
the extroverted marketing person. You needed a Michelle.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. So now I feel much more comfortable with that role. But in the first book, it was really hard for me, to go out and say, I'm an introvert. I've written a memoir here, read all my stories. And my stories are like an open book because I just felt like, if I'm going to write stuff but hold back things, it's really not a true story.
Or authentic,
It's not authentic. And what I really found, especially by writing a memoir, and I would encourage everybody to either write a memoir or journal or whatever, because I found it to be just really therapeutic, right? So you're thinking back to decades ago of what happened in your life. How often do we get to do that?
Yeah.
And for me, kind of putting some pieces together and realizing how this or that happened, which I had not really realized. And I had a writing coach at the time, and he said, you need to just like spill it all out
Verbally
there.
vomit on page.
That's right.
Yeah.
Get it all out there. You might decide to hold stuff back before you publish, but if you stunt the creative process and therapeutic process, you'll miss a lot of the value
That's
to
right.
yourself. And he was exactly right. So I did that. And probably fortuitously, it published a week before COVID. March of 2020.
Geez, wow.
Which was an introverted dream, like to be stuck in the house and not see anybody.
Zoom call.
Yeah, for the most part. So my marketing was somewhat limited, which was probably where my mind was at the time. But I've learned a lot about the process, about writing as well as publishing and marketing. And it's really been a great journey for me over the last 5 years.
Did you self-publish or how'd that work?
I did self-publish. So when I was writing and getting ready to publish, and I talked with some friends that I'd met in the writing community, this was still in Houston, and some that had self-published or traditionally or hybrid, and kind of got their gist of what they were doing and why, and really thought about what would fit for me. And I really felt like, one, I was retired, so I had time. I really liked the project management aspect of it because that's sort of what I did when I was working at Shell.
Yeah.
And so I've really enjoyed the self-publishing aspect. And I get full control over everything instead of having to, wait.
This is kind of our self-publishing.
Yeah, that's right.
Memoir.
Yeah, we're putting ourselves out there. I've been called an introvert. Sometimes I call myself an introvert.
I call you other names.
Shush up. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. How would you define an introvert?
That's a great question, because not only do extroverts oftentimes not know how to define it, but many introverts don't really know how to define it. So I look at two different aspects. I think generally, so it's a continuum, right? So we don't all sit on one extreme or the other.
Yeah, everybody's sort of like on the spec. I hate to say that, on the spectrum of somebody like Michelle on one end and somebody like a hermit in a cave on the other end. So.
Right. So, but I think two things really stand out. One, extroverts tend to think out loud. So being in a group, they're happy to kind of speak up and talk about things. They may not have you're jotting down notes.
No, but you're defining Michelle exactly. You're describing her 100%.
But they may or may not really have their thoughts condensed, but they like to kind of ponder and go through the process out loud. And so they get a lot of airtime usually.
Even I'm surprised what comes out of my mouth sometimes.
Not as much as the rest of us, Michelle.
So introverts, on the other hand, tend to be quite the opposite. Again, a range, but oftentimes will be relatively quiet in meetings. So a lot of people think they're not really engaged, but actually listening is learning. So oftentimes introverts are in the back or on the sidelines, but listening a lot, thinking about it, cogitating over, how does that really work? Or I heard something from Steve and I heard something from Michelle, and how do I put those two things together? That might be interesting. And waiting to actually share that. Now, some introverts are actually quite shy. It's not the same thing, but but some introverts are shy, and so they have a hard time sharing what they develop in their head. And I really encourage people to, you've got these unique perspectives. You need to share them, right?
Yeah.
We need to share that in the room. So that's a big difference. The other difference, I think, which is somewhat related to it, is that extroverts tend to get energy from being with other people, getting feedback, being at social events, going from one thing to another.
I don't. She's making eyes at me, but I don't. I don't get my energy from that. I know you do.
Didn't we just have this conversation last week?
Yes.
We did. I say if you
Steve's talking. Would you let him go?
If you take away all the fun stuff, Michelle.
I took away one fun thing and it turned out to be lame anyway.
It's fun.
Go ahead, Steve. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. It oftentimes happens with extroverts.
Yeah, I know. Trust me.
I grew up with three older sisters that were all to varying degrees extroverted. So trying to get a word in edgewise was
maybe
nearly
you got
impossible.
beat down into being an introvert, Steve.
It is possible. I'm still recovering from that experience, but introverts will tend to they may go out, they may be working in a very sociable setting, or they go to a dinner or whatever. But at some point, we just need to kind of have some alone time or downtime. It may not be alone. It may be with family or a close friend, but it's a small, intimate group where we can be ourselves, setting, we can be comfortable, and that helps us to re-energize.
Is it possible? Because I said this last week to Steve, and he didn't believe me. But I'm on 10 half the time. But then when I say there are times where I'm an introverted extrovert, where I really just need to, and Todd knows, I go sit out on the back patio, I water my plants. I just have to not have anything. I'll come home from work, I won't have the radio on, won't have anything on.
I don't think that has to do with introvert or extrovert. I think that has to do with
I just gotta
you go 900 miles an hour all day, and at some point you run out of gas.
Even I exhaust myself sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's if we can just
label it
for introversion or extroversion, but people that are on the go need some downtime, just like people that tend to be more introspective need our social time. So even during COVID, we need to get out and have some conversations with other people. It may not be as much as you need, and it may be shorter, but we need that sort of thing just because, we're human. So it varies person to person, but I think I
do like getting out and meeting people and having conversations. I can't do it near as long as Michelle. And so I don't know if that makes me an introvert as much as I love hanging out with my wife and just, doing something in the backyard or whatever. That's a great day for me.
I do.
I don't think that
Yeah,
that's
I like
introvert.
the energy though. Sometimes I like, we go on vacation and we'll just meet the most random people. We'll talk to the most random people.
I like
and have,
doing that too.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. I think my father was very much an extrovert. My father could get up in front of a room and speak to 1,000 people, like on the fly, just no notes, nothing. I stress more about it. I remember
Which is funny, isn't it? So actually, that prompts me for a question that I had. So, Steve, you're an introvert and a public speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you get really nervous when you do that?
Or is it more controlled thoughts versus?
And maybe they're not connected because Michelle's obviously an extrovert, but standing up in front of 25 people makes her knees shake. So,
then I'll do it.
I think it crosses over, but many introverts are public speakers or very active entrepreneurs or leaders or presidents or CEOs of companies or active on the stage. So many introverts like to do that. I think it's something that my father used to do some local acting. And as I grew up and recognized that we were both introverts, and it was like, how does he do that? Why does he do that?
It's a release also, is it?
I think so. And I think it's just something he enjoys. And so he does that. And afterwards, he would go find his respite somewhere to just relax. And so it kind of depends on your skill set and your interests and passion. And because I think a lot of introverts are told, you really wouldn't want to do this, right? Whether it's public speaking or different jobs. I've talked at universities and the question always comes up, well, what's the right or best jobs for introverts? And I think they think, it's going to be accountant or an IT person that sits in a room with a door closed. And, well, if that's you, that's fine, but it can be anything you want. It's whatever you have a passion for. You just need to figure out. And I think one of the keys for me and for most introverts is to understand what are our strengths and how do we apply those. So in answer to your question earlier about, myself and public speaking, when I did my first podcast about 3 years ago and very nervous, prepared for it for weeks, thinking about the questions and what would I say and all this sort of stuff. And over time, I've gotten much more comfortable with that. I still get butterflies in my stomach, but I think one of the things that I've learned to do is utilize some of my strengths. So one of the most common strengths for introverts is planning and preparation. We like to kind of have things lined up. We understand what's going. We've practiced things. So it's not impromptu, right? So impromptu conversation is a little bit nerve-wracking.
Right. Same for me.
Yeah. So I think about things and I plan. So, before I came here today, I was thinking about, okay, what do you think we're going to talk about and what things might I want to raise, issues or whatever. And then
you sat across from me.
Yeah. And I threw that all out the window. And so, I think it's just, doing what you really love and utilizing your strengths to do that as well as you can.
That's great. Yeah. We talked a couple weeks ago about when you walk into a room, say there's 100 people in a room, does that give you butterflies? If you're not sure you know anybody,
you don't know anybody, you walk into a room.
Does that give you butterflies?
Hate it.
Yeah. I don't like it either. What is your tactic for walking into a room with 100 people?
So when I was with Shell, I would oftentimes go to conventions for the business. And oftentimes I would do exactly what you're describing. It's a cocktail hour. There's 100 people. I moved around in a lot of different jobs at Shell. So oftentimes I was a new person to the industry and I didn't know people. And I hated the idea of having to go up to a table that I didn't know, squeeze into a conversation that was already existing, and then figure out how to back out when I was exhausted or whatever, but then recognizing I had to go to another table.
Right.
What I eventually recognized, one of my managers talked to me and he said, you don't necessarily have to do it this way. Right. So what are the objectives of going to this convention? Well, there might be sessions and stuff. So it's sitting in sessions and learning about that. And it's also meeting other people that might be beneficial for the business. Okay, well, that's fine. But you don't have to do it in a set of 100. And generally, those are not really very transactional sort of conversations anyway. Right. It's just chit chat. So I learned to kind of think about, I would try and get the agenda and the attendees list beforehand, figure out who I thought would be really helpful to meet.
Well, you take the fun out of it.
I know. You guys would not like it, but for me and most introverts, it really worked. And I would plan things and I would schedule a meeting. So from 11 to 12, I'm going to meet with this person or these few people from this company in a room. We're going to, or maybe at lunch or over a cocktail, but just a few of us. And then it's easier for me to
You're making connections then too.
And I believe I was making better connections. So I wouldn't walk out with 100 business cards from the cocktail, but I might walk out with 5 really important relationships that I've created.
People that you could talk to.
But that works. His strategy, that works for him. For me,
his strategy works for me too.
But you've told me in the past, and it is true, people will tell me, I will just meet people, and people will tell me their deepest, darkest secrets.
I don't know why that is.
They do.
That doesn't happen to you and me, Steve. I know that doesn't. But her tactic, believe it or not, is to walk into the room, 100 people she doesn't know, find the one person sitting by themselves and go up and introduce herself to them. That's her tactic.
No, I believe that as I mentioned, my sisters are extroverted, and the one that's youngest, so closest to me, big extrovert, and she and I have really interesting conversations, but she's a bit befuddled by my approach because she says, well, you never know who you're going to meet and what you're going to learn. It's going to be exciting. So just go up there and throw yourself out there. And if it doesn't work, you just move on. And I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting and easy for you, but it's not for me. And I think that everybody's just different.
Well,
there's a difference though, too. Michelle's a woman. And you and I walk up to a woman sitting by herself at the cocktail party with 100 people and go, hey, I'm Steve. That's different than if Michelle walks up and goes, hi, I'm Michelle, isn't it? That's a fact.
Is.
Well, how then do you suggest an extrovert like me communicate to an introvert?
That's a great question. And I really appreciate that question. And I've actually found that a good chunk of people that visit my website and buy my book and stuff are actually extroverts because they realize that, generally, I grew up and I felt like I was alone. I was the only introvert in my life. But in reality, I term it the hidden half. About half the people in society
I'd say that's
are
right,
introverts to varying degrees. And so there's many extroverts, whether they have family members that are introverts and they're like, I want to just understand them more, or they work with them, or they're their manager,
or they're married to them,
or whatever. And so they want to know more about how to make that approach, just as you've asked. And I think the best approach is just to give them a bit of space and time. So certainly in meetings, in formal meetings, I advocate that the leader, introvert or extrovert, provide an agenda, provide a pre-read if it's a intricate, long, important sort of meeting. Extroverts probably won't look at any of that. Introverts will gobble it up and say, okay, now I can think about, and now I know what the topic's going to be. I can think about my questions. I can think about, this thing in the pre-read I don't really agree with, so I'm gonna talk about that or challenge that or whatever. And so it's all about that preparation and planning. I think so extroverts really, in the business setting, it's great for them to give that space. In a more social setting, I think it's just also giving them that space a little bit. A lot of times, whether it's in meetings or socials, we have a topic and people just jump on that topic. Well, those are usually the extroverts that jump on the topic, and the introverts are not as comfortable. And so most people will just move on. Whereas really conscious leaders or just people, whether they're extroverts or introverts, will say, does anybody else have anything they want to add? Not necessarily pointing it out, hey, you, the introvert, what do you have to say?
Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything they want to add? And so it invites us to have that conversation.
Or picking up on social cues. I feel like I'm pretty good at that, but I also realize that I can be like a toaster sometimes, where I just kind of pop up.
More like a Jack in the Box. So, Steve, was your second book The Essential Guide for Families with Down Syndrome?
Well, no, actually, my second book was called The Corporate Introvert. And so at that point, I had retired. And I really reflected back on my career. So I'd written my first book, so I was connecting with my introversion and learning a lot about that. And I really reflected a lot on my work career. And for most of it, I would say 2/3 of it, about 20 years, I just felt like I was completely out of place. I was an introvert in an extroverted culture. I looked at other people that seemed to be successful and leaders, and they seemed to me to be very extroverted. And so I tried to put that mask on and do that for myself
to be successful.
And my career was good up to that point, but my health and just mental well-being was not very good. So I tried to figure out how to cope in different ways. so many addictive ways as well
Yeah.
that were just not healthy at all for me. And I was in London. I was transferred to London for a few years in the middle of my career, about this time, about 20 years into the career. And that was great from a family perspective, but really hard from a personal perspective because I was there I knew nobody. I had a team around the world, so I was traveling a lot to places that I didn't know, which for me is actually exciting, but meeting people that I really didn't see often enough to develop this closer relationship with. So it really made me feel uncomfortable. And I was on one of those trips, and I just really was very frustrated and felt like, something's got to change. Either I need to change jobs or I need to do something different. And I realized that. And so that really was the beginning of a long journey for me of just trying to recognize what introversion truly is. Because oftentimes we get tied up in these myths of loner and antisocial, and even introverts get pulled down by that. And so when I realized what it really is and how I could use my strengths, then it changed the way I worked. It changed the way I led teams, and it really helped me to feel much more comfortable. Right. So when I retired, I really felt like this was a book I wanted to share, because the hidden half out there that usually is not raising their hand or asking for help, but tries to do it themselves, and that didn't work for me for 2 decades, needs that help. And so that's why I put the book out there.
So that first book is more of a therapeutic journey for you, kind of figuring out why you became introverted or, down that path. And the second one's more of strategies and helping those. And
I like that instead of focusing on the negative aspect of it, because there are some strengths to being an
Absolutely,
introvert. One of the things that I like about introverts is if you're at a class, say with 50 people, sometimes a couple of the extroverts are raising their hand all the time and saying things that the rest of us are going, oh, shut up. Nobody wants to hear that. And introverts we overthink.
Yeah.
But it's a strength, because when we do talk, a lot of times we'll say things and people will go, man, that's a good idea. Or we didn't think about that, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So you're thinking about it as a strength.
Yes, definitely. So on our website, we did a strength quiz. And so you can answer 20 questions or so, and it kind of assesses where your strengths are. So along 8 different qualities. So planning and preparation tend to be really high. Learning, people just tend to want to learn. Listening and observing is very high. But even some of the things that you wouldn't think are there, creativity is very high. So a lot of writers, artists and the like oftentimes are introverts, because it's just that creative spark that comes from within, or they recognize it and manage that. But even sociability can be a strength. But all of them really are. You need to understand what they are and utilize them yourself. And how do you utilize them will help you to build your own self-confidence and your place, whether it's at work or in the social environment.
I want to know, where does your wife fall on the introverted, extroverted?
My wife is introverted.
Is she?
And, for some things in some situations, she's more introverted than I am. In other cases, she's less introverted than I am. And certainly I've met many couples that one's an introvert and one is an extrovert. That's
Todd and I, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that can work equally as well. I used to work with a lot of extroverts, and I think the key is just that awareness from both people, respect for both, because I think that a lot of what we talk about, or I talk about when I share this book, The Corporate Introvert, and the learnings with other organizations and the like, is that it's really an aspect of diversity and inclusion, right? It's the diversity of how we think and how we process things. And so if we've got a team of, let's say, 10 people, and half of them, let's say, are extroverts and half are introverts, and we go into a meeting and all you really hear are what the extroverts want to share, and they pop up and they do this and that, then you're only hearing from half the team. So you're really missing out on the value of that team. And those team members are probably not happy because of that, and because they're not comfortable to share or whatnot.
And sometimes their ideas, they're more analytical. They think things through. So sometimes their ideas can be some of the best that group can come up with.
I'm struck by the feeling that when you talked about diversity and inclusion, and it kind of like, to circle back around to Gwendolyn, if that has also helped you and your family kind of cope and handle the situation that you guys were put in and elevate Gwendolyn to the person and that she is now and being more independent, like you said, and she kind of strives to go out there. Do you think that kind of helped you kind of understand where she was coming from also?
That's a great point. And I think it probably does, just because, especially, over the last 15 years or so, I've gone through my own personal introspective journey and realizing that there's not a right or wrong. And so just briefly back to what we were talking about, I think that circle of 5 plus 5 really is best when everybody works together. So it's not that this half is better than that half, but it's kind of working together.
That makes sense.
And I realized, when I applied those sort of learnings with my family and with my daughter in particular, that, there's different ways to go about this, and everybody needs a voice. And so she's a great young lady. Sometimes she needs help to kind of pull her thoughts together. And we had just really great conversations as she got older, and probably as I had more recognition of this as well, of, well, what do you want? Right. So it's oftentimes with any of our kids, well, this is the plan. Right. And then eventually, probably with most of our kids, they get their own voice.
Yeah.
It's harder for people with IDD, intellectual disabilities. And it was harder for her, but we sat down. She came home one day, actually, from school, and she said, I want to be independent, which I thought, that's a pretty bold statement for anybody to make.
To even understand what that would mean.
Exactly. And she was about 18. And so I'll never forget, we put a butcher block piece of paper out on the kitchen countertop, and we said, well, what does that mean to you? And so she said, I want to move out. I want to be able to take care of myself. I want to be able to work. I want to have relationships, all these things. And then we started to talk about, well, what does it take to get those? So you can't just flip a switch and say, well, now you can do that, or now you can move out. So what skills do you need to develop? But it all really started with us. Actually, I was going to say with us, my wife and I, listening to her, but it actually started with her saying, hey, I have something to say. I want to be independent.
That's
and I
pretty
think,
cool.
Tying back to the introversion, I think sometimes we just have to, even if we're nervous or we're not sure, we need to kind of raise our hand and speak up and share what we've got, because it's probably going to be beneficial.
Yeah. And I think that's a dream that every parent has, is that your child going out and being independent. But your situation is not so unique to this community. You were talking before we started, you were talking about that there is a small community here within Dripping Springs that families that are going through the same struggles that you guys are going through, and also supportive. And so I know you've only been here 2 years, but talk about that a little bit, about how the community is kind of fostering that.
Yeah. I mean, I was quite surprised at the size and the level of activity of the community here in the Dripping Springs area. So as you mentioned, we've been here for 2 years. We have a neighborhood magazine that comes out every month or two in Belterra. And on the cover of one of the magazines was a family who had a child with Down syndrome. So I got in contact with her. Ends up she lives right around the corner. And we were just chatting about things and what was going on. And she said, you really need to kind of join this Facebook group, and you need to kind of come out with this, because there's a lot of relatively large number of people, well over a dozen people that are mostly kids, but also some adults with Down syndrome in the community, which I was surprised at that, because it's not a huge community. And really what I found is a lot of these families moved here specifically for the support for people with special needs. Some of them moved from Austin, some moved from other places. The school district in Dripping Springs, it seems, has been really conscious about serving that part of the community and encouraging them and including them.
And the businesses have been
businesses have helped. And so it's really created a magnet for families to come out here and become active and share, the challenges that they've got and the successes. And so it's really exciting to see that's happening here in Dripping Springs.
That was one of the questions I had. What types of challenges do adults with Down syndrome typically have? What kind of things are out there if somebody's listening right now and they've got a 1-year-old with Down syndrome, what kind of challenges are they going to expect along the way here?
Yeah, so we experienced some of those early on with our daughter when she was just born, and then we've realized that there's so many new and different challenges as they get older. Right, when they're born, a lot of it is just trying trying to cope with that and realize that plans are changed, and then to get services, whether it's occupational or physical therapy, speech therapy, to help them develop. And so in different communities, those are available in different ways. So some are great, like out here, and some are not so great. And so you have to really find and advocate. And that was a big part of what happens throughout their school ages, is you really have to advocate. And again, some school districts like Dripping are really proactive in that, and others, and of course, I mean, my daughter's 28, and so that's a bit dated, and it was a different era back then. But, we certainly had our challenges because they were not prepared to really manage that situation. So they were really not supportive of our daughter being included in the mainstream classes. Nowadays, it still happens in some places that way, but in many places, the school district wants to include them, has special aids if necessary, does what they need to kind of balance some special needs classes that are helping them with their specific issues, but also including them in other classes, which really gives them a platform for learning and growing, not just academically, although that's true, but also socially, because eventually throughout life, you want them to be part of the community, not an ostracized segment.
What's funny about that, the mainstreaming thing, is we always think about how that's a benefit to the child with a disability. It's actually a benefit to all the other kids in the classroom too, because they're a part of our society, and it teaches them how to interact with somebody that's a little bit different than they are.
That's right.
Well, and
it's a benefit.
What do you think some of the biggest misconceptions are that a parent kind of goes in when they're first walking this walk of being a Downs parent?
Yeah, we talk a lot. Actually, I think the first chapter in the book is about mindset, because it's natural. My wife and I went through this when our daughter was born, and our mindset was, plans have changed, and all these ideas we had are thrown out the window, and
hopes and dreams. But now you just have new hopes and dreams.
Well,
right?
And some parents definitely get bogged down in those negatives and the challenges that many have in school districts and that sort of stuff. And it really can be tough. And so we talk a lot about the positive mindset and trying to, you have to kind of deal with the moment, and some call it grieving or whatever at the outside, but you have to kind of flip that switch and recognize there are a huge number of opportunities out there now more than ever, for sure. For any families with special needs. And so looking at those opportunities and really having in the parent's mind, one day my child will be independent. They will live on their own. They'll work. They'll have relationships. They may, they can do nearly anything that they and we set our mind to and support. And with that mindset, it'll happen. If you have a mindset of, I don't think she can do this or that, and I think she'll always live with us and all these other things, and she won't be able to do that, then that's how not only the parents will grow up, but the individual will grow up. And so then when you say at 18 or 22 or 32 or 42, well, now you're going to be independent, either because people have changed their mind or because the parents have passed away, whatever the situation might be. It's hard to say, well, we've kind of coddled you and underestimated you for decades, but now you need to kind of do more things. So it's really a mindset change that has to happen from the earliest of ages.
And it's a lot harder for somebody that's 30, 38, 40 years old to make those changes in their life than if they've been sort of guided and trained their whole life to be to that point, right? To be independent or to make that move. I
think that also parents like yourself are kind of coming out of the shadows, and it's not something to be hidden. I was doing a little bit, reading about it, and just 50 years ago, the life expectancy for a child with Downs was 12 years old, and now it's in the 60s and 70s, and there's so many medical advancements. And I did not know this. I was reading that there's 4 types of Downs, but the majority of Downs children and adults fall, and I think it was like 85, 90% to the first, I can't remember what it was called, but, with each different types, there's different challenges. There's the heart challenges. A lot of children have heart issues, but I think it's something to be said. Like, you've brought this book to light, and there are parents that are feeling now it's not something to hide anymore. Let's put my child in the same class as this child. Right. Let's integrate them into mainstream.
Yeah, I think there is, to your point, a lot more enthusiasm in the community and in the IDD community, but in the broader community as well, that there's great opportunities what you bring up as far as lifespan is exactly true. And it, with it, it brings many opportunities. You know, the housing opportunities and work opportunities are much more abundant and creative than they used to be. But it also brings forward health challenges, financial challenges, inclusion, housing challenges, or what are you going to do? Because this is the first generation, basically, that is outliving their parents. So back in the 80s, when they lived a much shorter life, parents expected they were going to live with them, and they probably did. And they probably did until the parents passed away. But the child probably passed away earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And so now they have to recognize that they're probably going to outlive me. I hope they outlive me, maybe by quite a number of years. And so what are we going to do with that? Because we felt like we certainly didn't want our daughter to be in that situation. And though we have 2 other kids that are very loving, we've been very poignant that this is not your obligation.
I wanted to ask you about that, about the siblings and their journey as well, because Steve has a special needs child. You know, I raised a special needs nephew, and I know that from my own experience with my kids is that there were times there was so much attention I had to give to him that my kids felt like they weren't getting the attention that they needed. Like it was always about this person, always. So
how'd you navigate that?
In many ways it wasn't hard, but in some ways it was, right? And I think like our other daughter, who's a year younger than Gwendolyn, she calls it middle child syndrome because she's a middle child, but it probably was just as much the fact that she was not as needy as her sister.
And to us, it's logical, right? It's logical for us as adults, as the caretaker, the primary caretaker, to explain that to our child. And now that my youngest, who got the brunt of it, right? She's now 23. She's now starting to understand. She harbored a lot of resentment about it, so she's starting to kind of come full circle and go, okay, I get why you did that. I get why you. Yeah,
it is fun to see our kids get to be.
My kids are doing that now. When they were late teens, they carried a little bit of a chip on their shoulder about my son and the attention he got and the special treatment he got that wasn't, air quotes, fair.
Yeah.
But you can't treat them both the same. But now that they're more grown up, they're starting to go, okay, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they knew, right? It's the environment they grew up in. So although they might know that it's a little different than their friends or whatnot, that it was what they knew and realized. But generally, our 3 grew up very close and supportive. And now that they're not living together, I think it's even more, they're even closer and more supportive. Right. But we've had conversations with them to say, listen, one day I expect you will be the guardian, which means, a legal guardian to make decisions as you need to, but you will not be the caregiver. She will not live with you. You will not have to manage her.
That's an important conversation.
Huge difference. Huge difference.
Yeah, there's huge difference.
And many, this whole conversation about guardianship, caregiver, and housing are things that are still really tough within the community because a lot of parents, I recognize that a lot of parents feel shame when they think about it because they thought, well, she's always going to live with me.
Yeah, right? Or you're sending your child off to be somebody else's, problem, and instead it's like, no, you're actually helping your child become more independent. And because that's the old taboo, right? Is that you had a child, and so it was somebody else's. It's like, oh, you don't ever, you don't want to raise that child, and it's just so weird how we're breaking these kind of generational taboos, and we're not allowing that BS anymore.
Right. And it's definitely changing for the better.
Yeah.
Some people are slower at coming around to that, but we really felt like, to your point, we felt like it's not a selfish decision that we should be ashamed of. It's what Gwendolyn wants.
Sure.
And we know, just as with her brother and sister, she's going to flourish a lot more when she moves out from under the umbrella of the family home. And, we're 18 minutes away. We see her often. And so that's what we wanted, but she wanted to have that independence. And we also recognized that we did not want, we wanted to be part of the solution. So where she lives after this, we wanted to be part of that solution as opposed to she's going to stay with us until we absolutely can't do it, until maybe somebody.
And then you're forced to make a decision.
You're forced and you don't get to think about the options, and you might not even be part of the decision-making if suddenly you're not around. And that was the situation that scared us more than her living on her own.
You talked about your journey and at the beginning of this journey, did you ever imagine that there would be a time that you and your wife would be sitting on your patio enjoying a glass of wine and being empty nesters? Right?
Early on, no. I think as she was a teenager, I mean, probably the first time is we used to take her to a lot of social stuff within the special needs community in Houston, and we would bring her there and go in there and sit with her, or eventually sit kind of in the back, but keep an eye on her. And I don't know what age, but mid-teens. And she said, you don't need to come in with me. I've got this. Come back and pick me up in 2 hours. And I said, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, leave.
Wow.
and I thought, this is a good thing.
That is a good thing.
And so fast forward 10 years or so, and she's on her own. And yes, so we started to realize that, but especially when she came home and she said, I want to be able to move out.
But that's encouraging to other parents that are just starting this journey or getting the diagnosis and kind of like in the thick of it. If their child's 6, 7, 8 years old, and whatever struggles that they're dealing with, to know that there's light at the end of that tunnel. And you mentioned Marbridge. We definitely need more facilities, like that, good facilities.
That sort of transitions to a question I haven't. Since you wrote the book, I'm hoping you know some things about it. How's our government doing supporting people with special needs, and what kind of government, like Social Security, disability, Medicare, Medicaid. Do you know much about that kind of stuff? What kind of stuff's out there that people can take advantage of?
Really important topic,
good question.
Especially as they live longer, right? So they have to pay for that. Somebody has to pay for all that.
Can they remain on your insurance after 26?
So they can if you apply for that, right? So I had to go to my employer and say she's going to be 26. They give me a form. I fill it out. So now she's on my insurance. She's also on Medicaid and will eventually be on Medicare. But she gets better coverage because she's still on my insurance. So there are many important dates you have to think about. That is one of them. 18 is one of them because they turn officially an adult. So if you want guardianship, then you should be doing that before or as they're 18. You can do it later if you missed, but you really need to do that because otherwise you could be at the doctor or they could be in the hospital for an emergency. And the doctor comes out and says, we need to do this and that. Let me see your guardianship papers. And if you don't have them, they say, well, I really can't take any advice from you. I can only take it from Gwendolyn. And if she's not able to give me the decision-making, I'm going to have to go to the state and bring somebody from the state in, which is not where I want to go
down that road. No.
Specifically to your question, there are lots of different benefits that are due families, including Social Security, including RSDI from the parents.
What's RSDI?
Retirement, disability, and survivorship. Okay. So when a parent, like myself, when I retire and I start getting Social Security, my daughter can get part of that. So she can get more Social Security. It doesn't reduce my Social Security, but she's able to get more Social Security when I either am disabled or retired.
Oh, wow.
And start to take Social Security. And one day when I die, she'll get even more Social Security benefits. So, but you have to know about those sort of things.
How do people find out about that? Because with my son, it's an area we don't know a lot about. So how do people find out about that?
Well, I would point you to my book because actually one of the reasons why we wrote the book is we learned so much during the process of our daughter's independence. We didn't know all these things. And like many families, you scramble around and you find bits and pieces from people you talk to or you Google or whatever, but there's just a lot of information out there. And so we really felt like, you know what? In talking with other families, they're in the same situation. So we've gathered all this information. Why don't we put it together in a book so that other families don't have to start from scratch? So if you're looking at, there's a section on financial, which we've lived it, so I'm familiar with it, but we've also engaged with a couple of expert financial planners to contribute to that section to make sure that what we're providing is accurate, timely, and so forth. Otherwise, honestly, what a family needs to do is they have to talk with a lot of people and they have to Google, and it's hard to know that you've got everything.
Are there people out there, though, that specialize in helping people navigate the government corridors with these kind of things?
Yes.
There are.
There are. And they're here in Austin and Dripping Springs as well.
Really?
So,
can people reach out to you, say on your website, to get contacted with those? And tell us your website.
So for the Down syndrome activity, it's beyonddownsyndrome.net. So beyonddownsyndrome.net, and there's lots of information there on I put out a weekly blog on a variety of topics for people with Down syndrome. We have some quizzes. We also have some resources, including financial planners and the like. Many of those are in the book as well.
But it sounds like you're not even zero focusing on Down syndrome. It's like also some of your principles can be
kids
applied.
with disabilities.
Yeah.
We've talked to a lot of other groups that are not specifically Down syndrome because they recognize that. And what I've told them is probably 80% of my book is applicable to other people with intellectual disabilities. Some of it is specific for Down syndrome, but I think it's a great starting point for families in general. It's trying to get that information, and it shouldn't be so hard that so many families actually just give up, or just this overwhelming. Life can be overwhelming in general, and they just don't even get started.
I'll attest to that. That's happened to us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And really some of the things that you have to do, like housing we talked about. So in Texas, and every state is different, but in Texas, there are public funds available to families with special needs. And so if you apply for those and receive those, you can get benefits that include paying for day programs or even housing and other things like occupational therapy and respite care for the parents and things like that. However, in the state of Texas, there's a waiting list. So that waiting list is really long. And if you leave the state...
Years and years.
So we left the state to go overseas in 05 to 08.
So you get kicked off.
So we left the list, we cannot stay on the list, came back in 08, got back on the list. So that was in 08. So 15 years ago, Gwendolyn is still on the list. And they say that she'll probably still be on the list for 10 to 15 years before she gets off the list and gets benefits.
That is
unacceptable.
That is unacceptable.
30 years.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable.
And is that just because of the money allocated to these programs? So we need to lean on these politicians that are spending all this money on places where they're just flushing it down the toilet and really start spending it on places that'll impact people's lives.
That's right. Yeah. It's state funds, and they can decide, they make choices every day about where I'm pointing my funds to. And there's just not enough funds, and it's become less and less. I think when COVID hit, they really cut it back because the state was trying to balance budget or whatever. But these are people's lives. And like you say, for 30 years to be on a waiting list for things like that, especially as there are more opportunities, but you can't afford them. So there are public housing, which means that you get off that waiting list, and then you can utilize those funds for housing or other things. Since we're still on the waiting list, Marbridge is a privately funded community, and so we pay that out of our pocket besides the Social Security and some other.
It sounds like to me that maybe your next career could be a lobbyist to champion this subject. And
there are a lot of people that are doing that here in the city and across the country, because every state again is different. Texas is unfortunately probably number 50 amongst states as far as special needs funding.
And if you look at some of the stuff we spend money on, it's maddening to think that's the place that they're coming up short.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has just been a very delightful and enlightening conversation.
And how can people get your book, Steve?
So easiest place there's two ways you can get my book. You can go to Amazon, and my books are all on Amazon. Or you can go to beyondintroversion.com, and there you can find my Corporate Introvert in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. And,
audiobook. That's me. Sign me up for that.
Yeah. I mean, I love audiobooks. And so we put that out there at the end of last year, and it's really been very popular. And if you go to beyonddownsyndrome.net, then you can also find my book on the Essential Guide for Families with Down Syndrome.
That's great.
And there's lots of other information on the website. So I encourage people to go check it out and
definitely
see what they can
getting
learn.
your books. There's a lot for me to learn there. And just this hour we've spent with you has been very, very helpful and informational. So appreciate you coming into the studio today.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to read your book so I can figure out Steve.
Thanks for coming in, Steve.
Thank you.
This show has been brought to you in part by the real estate pros at the Mallett Integrity Team. When you're looking to buy or sell, you need them on your side. Why settle for less when you can have real estate done right? Give them a call at 512-829-2062 or get more info at mallettintegrityteam.com.
You know you like us, so go now to Apple Podcast or Spotify and leave us a review. Why don't you? We love your feedback and comments. Email us at mallettandmichelle@gmail.com.
Thanks for putting up with us.